Welcome to the quarterly licensing meeting. I'm Councillor Newweight, and I think the best thing I can do is ask everyone to just introduce themselves, starting from my right-hand side. Can you introduce themselves, please?
Karen Mayo, Democratic Services Officer.
Dennis Harris, Assistant Chief Legal Officer.
Steve Bendel, Licensing Team Leader.
Simone Potter-Reid, Licensing Officer.
PC Nick Hilton, Licensing Officer for the Police.
Councillor Robert Kemp.
And Councillor Stephen Brooks.
Thank you all very much. I'd better just go through, because we've been webcasted, I think we should go through the procedures that we should really do. If anyone uses a fire alarm, please follow the green signs outside that will direct you to the car park down opposite the police station. That's the agenda. And I would just like to ask people if they just switch off their mobile phones or put them on silent. And then the first thing we'll do on the agenda is agenda item 1, apologies.
Apologies for absence received from Councillor Alan Jones, Giles Davis, Maria Graham, John Marshall, Raymond Mills and Wayne Tomlinson.
Thank you. We move on to item 2. What's that? Declarations of interest.
Chair, just to assist, I'm not aware of any general interest the members need to declare.
Thank you. So we'll now move on to item agenda 3. It's pages 5 to 8 of the minutes of the previous licensing committee.
I think it's the subcommittee first and then going on to the licensing hearing, and then the subcommittee on page 9.
Subcommittee on page 9.
I think they go from 9 to 18 for the minutes.
Page 5, yeah.
Yeah.
Pages 5 to 8, isn't it? That's right. So can we start on page 5? Page 6, page 7, and page 8.
Can I just make a comment on that?
Yeah.
The meeting on this date is the 29th of January. The corporate diary should show me sitting in court in Newport on that particular day, which I was, because I've just checked my phone, so my apologies would have been submitted to you, but obviously not appended into the book, because I list all my court sittings for the whole year.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks.
I could move the minutes are correct. I'm not sure who's going to second them.
Yes, I'll second Councillor Kemp. And we move on to item agenda 4, minutes of the licensing subcommittee, and that's pages 9 and 10. Page 9 and page 10. Could someone move the true record?
I can't, because obviously I wasn't in attendance, if you like, and so the only person who was present would have been yourself.
Myself.
Chair, what I'm going to suggest is that obviously there are 2 members here who are present then, whether we put those minutes back to the next committee and then they can be approved formally at the next committee when you've got 2.
I'd agree with that.
Thank you. So we move on to item agenda 5, minutes of the previous licensing hearing, which are on pages 11 to 18. That's page 11. 12. 13. 14. 15. 16. 17. And 18. Were you then, Councillor Kent?
No, again, I don't know whether we should be noting them or whether we should be accepting them.
I think...
Mr. Chairman, I would recommend that we receive the minutes. These are subcommittees not made up of the full members. And these are hearings. So I would move that we receive the outcome of the hearings, because the people will have been notified of the outcomes here anyway.
Yeah, that's fine, because as you said, it's slightly different to the subcommittees and the licensing committees.
So we will officially just move that we receive these minutes. Thank you. Then we move on to item agenda 6, approve of amendment to the Council's Hackney Carriage and Private Hire licensing. That's pages 19 and 22. Do you need anything to say on that, Steve? Thanks.
I'll introduce the report, Chair. Thank you. The purpose of this report is to seek approval of the committee to amend the Council's policy on the administration and regulation of Hackney Carriage and Private Hire licences, to amend the section in relation to fire extinguishers being carried in the licensed vehicles. And the recommendation is, as an alternative recommendation that I'm going to ask the committee to consider, is either to remove the condition that fire extinguishers must be carried in vehicles, or to replace the requirement for the extinguisher to be tested by a BAFE approved engineer and replaced with to be tested by a competent person. The background to this is that there are being difficulties with our taxi trade in getting the required BAFE certifications with local businesses, because it's outside of the council's control. It is purely private businesses that do this type of work. And a number of drivers or owners of vehicles have experienced difficulties, and they have been expressed to us. As a result of them expressing the difficulties, I made extensive inquiries, particularly with South Wales Fire and Rescue Fire Safety Officers, Mr Andrew Russ, who is our liaison officer, and discussed the legislation and the requirements around fire extinguishers and the safe use of them. As a result of that, there is no legislation or guidance that is in force in health and safety legislation or fire service regulations which require vehicles of less than 8 passenger seats, which would be our licensed vehicles, to carry fire extinguishers. There is recommendation on public service vehicles, buses, etc., but not in normal cars. The other issue that was identified is that most of our taxi drivers, because of the danger of being assaulted by fire extinguishers, with great big heavy lumps of metal being carried inside the cab of the car when they're carrying passengers who are not quite so friendly as others, they tend to carry them in the boot. As a result, if there was a vehicle fire, access to the fire extinguisher is quite difficult. And the recommendation would be you get away from the vehicle and make sure that the area is clear, call the fire brigade, and don't try and go back to the vehicle to get your fire extinguisher, which may be in the boot. The other thing that came up in a report that I was given by the fire safety officer is that vehicle fires now are quite rare. In the old days, with the old carburettors and petrol engines and very poor wiring in vehicles, there was a lot of vehicle fires because of the standard of manufacture. Now the standard of manufacture is so high, unless they've been tampered with, there are very few vehicle fires which are not set deliberately. So as a result of that, as I say, there is no legal requirement or health and safety requirement that requires fire extinguishers to be carried. We still have it in our policy that they have to be, and our policy states they must be certified as being tested by a BAFE engineer. Now, the second thing is there's no requirement in law for it to be a BAFE engineer to actually test a fire extinguisher. The requirement in law is to say it's by a competent person. And if you have a look on, I think it's paragraph 5.3, it tells you what a competent person is. That is under the British standards for testing of fire extinguishers. So what I'm asking the panel is to make a decision on here as to whether or not we still need to keep the condition in the policy at all about carrying fire extinguishers in vehicles in light of the new information that has come to light and my discussions and consultation with the fire safety officer, or whether we at all, so if we remove it totally, or whether we just amend it so that it can be a competent person, which opens up the opportunity for the vehicle owners to go to different companies so that there's more competition. And that's where the issue is. There's no competition out there at the moment. They have to go to one company, and that's causing the issue. So those are the two options I'm giving to the committee for you to discuss and to make a decision on.
Any members have any comments on
I think that having sought the advice of the Fire Authority and having taken that into account, it's all contained in here. If there's no need any longer, because I have a motor vehicle with an extinguisher supplied with it as a matter of course, it's kept not only in the boot, but it's kept under in an enclosed compartment, so it's a complete waste of time anyway. And based upon the information that we've given, if this is determined by professional people that it is not necessary any longer, then let's don't put anything in there at all. Most companies today seem to be bereft with legislation for just about everything, and sometimes we can over-legislate. Modern vehicles, most of our taxis are of the modern variety. We don't have any real old ones other than the classics. So I think, having heard and read the advice from the Fire Authority, I think that we should go along with those. So I'd recommend that it was removed entirely.
And I'd second that, Chair.
Thank you. And I'll be carried then, Steve.
Thank you very much, Chair.
We now move on to item agenda 7, a quarterly update. Again, I'll ask Steve if you introduce that. This is pages 23 to 34.
Thank you, Chair. Before we actually go into the report, I'd just like to, for members of the committee who don't know, PC Nick Hilton has now taken over as our liaison officer with licensing. Some of you would have known him. He's been with us before. But as with the council, the police are going through lots of different reorganisations and moves as well. I'd like to just introduce PC Hilton to the committee. He's now our liaison, but he's shared with Blaine and Gwent at the moment and parts of Caerphilly, I believe. Nick, do you want to say anything?
No, it's only, I'm pleased to be back. It's been, I think, about 5 or 6 years, so I'm quite well versed with Torfaen. So any problems, I will be glad to help. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to the report, Chair, is to update the committee about all licensing matters for the final quarter of the 2014-15 period, and in particular the months of January, February and March. And this is the end of the year roundup. The recommendations are that the committee note and comment on the contents of the report, that the committee approve the commencement of the consultation of the policy on administration and regulation of hackney carriages and private hire licences, that the committee approve the commencement of the consultation on the Gambling Act 2005 policy, that the committee notes the activity report for the annual period of 2014-15, and that the committee note the prioritisations for the 2015-16 performance indicators. I'll move on to the Licensing Act to start with. As you can see, I've put very little under Licensing Act 2003 in this quarter. We were in the quiet period just after Christmas, and it was very quiet indeed, and other priorities. However, what I have passed around to you today as an additional document, which is not part of the original committee reports, is a list of all the changes in legislation that are coming into effect, either have already come into effect at the beginning of April or will be coming into effect next month. As you can see, there's quite an extensive list covering various parts of the Act. Some of them, the list does go back to 2011 changes, because I thought it was necessary to put those in, because the rest of it leads on from the changes made in the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act. But there's all sorts of different things with regards to descriptions of entertainment. There's different things on punishment. They've removed the maximum fine, which, of say, carrying on an unauthorised licensable activity was £20,000, which was quite high anyway, and I very much suspect that no magistrate ever imposed that amount. But there's now an unlimited fine. So all of these are now unlimited penalties. That's one part of it. And then we've got amendment orders to the legislative reform order of 2014, which amended the 2012 legislation. Taking even more things out of regulated entertainment is all to do with the coalition government's deregulation agenda. And you see you've got the Legislative Reform Entertainment Licensing Order of 2014, which again changed things even further. And going through there is taking out things like circuses, live and recorded music on community premises. So there's quite an extensive list of changes which has come in the Legislative Reform Order, which is come into force on the 6th of April. So we're really at the very early stages of these legislative changes. And then we've got the Deregulation Act of 2015, which has then made other amendments to the legislation. And as you can see, they've removed the offence of selling liqueur confectionery to under 16s, whereas in the past it was an alcohol sell. It could be prosecuted for selling Harvey's Bristol cream chocolates to a 15-year-old. Now that's no longer an offence. The limit on temporary event notices, that's going to make a difference to a lot of community premises, going up from 12 to 15 from the 1st of January 2016. A couple of other things there. They've removed the expiry date on personal alcohol licences. They used to be valid for a 10-year period. Now they're valid for life. So we've not got to do all of the renewals that we expected this year, to be honest with you, because it was this year the 10-year anniversary of when the Act came in. That makes me feel old, because that's when I started. Also, we've got the exemption from requiring premises to exhibiting films in community premises where it's not for profit. So if you're running a community hall and you wanted to put a film on, you don't need to have a licence anymore for that. And then there's the community ancillary sellers notice. We've had tens and tons, and now we've got cans, which is another anachronism that we're having to work with. And as you can see, that's going to we're waiting for regulations to give us more detail on this. This is not in force yet. So when the government reforms and they get themselves back around the table, the next thing they'll be doing is writing the regulations to go alongside of this. I think they're already drafted with my communications I've had with LGA in London, but they've had to go on hold because of the PERDA period. So it basically means that specified premises where they sell alcohol which is ancillary to the main business, or community events where they want to sell alcohol or have a raffle and have alcohol at there. At the moment, they would have to have an alcohol licence, which would be a temporary event. But now they can actually give a notice, a community ancillary notice, which is going to be called a Schedule 5A notice, which will allow them to do this at any time they wish, as long as it's within certain parameters. I'm not going to go through this in detail because it's so new. I'm still getting my head around it. Writing this helped me. But as you can see, there's quite a lot. But this will also affect, if you remember the last committee, we approved the consultation for the Licensing Act policy. Well, particularly with the Deregulation Act, there may be a couple of other amendments I may need to make to that policy. I haven't made them yet, but there will be amendments that have to be made as a result of this. Only a couple of tweaks, there's nothing major, but it has to be done because it has to fit in with national legislation. That's just for your information on the changes to the Licensing Act.
Thank you, Mr. Bandel. One thing I noticed in the about the selling of cans, that there doesn't seem to be any sort of regulation to say that what they do with the cans after. Should somebody have to have bins provided?
It's not cans as in tin cans.
Yeah.
It's community ancillary notice.
Oh,
It's a shortened term for community ancillary notice.
Right. Thank you for that, Mr. Mendel.
Right. Okay. As you can see, there were two complaints of a very minor nature in that period. But like I say, we are in the lull period following Christmas, and the good weather over the Easter period and recently is starting to change already, which I could say. So we would expect with the good weather that things will change. I'm now going to move on to Hackney Carriage and Private Hire licensing. There's quite a lot in this section this time. I'm not going to go through every single part of the report. You've obviously seen that and read it for yourself. I'll point out that on paragraph 5.2.2 that we are still, whenever we can, working with Gwent Police road policing officers, stopping and checking vehicles. And Simone went out with them on the 14th of March, stopped 16 vehicles, and 2 vehicles.
So, Steve, where are you? Can you
5.2.2, page 24.
Of the report?
Yeah, of the report, sorry.
Okay,
yeah. I mean, the details in that paragraph on 5.2.2 highlight that we still have quite an issue with regards to vehicles. And that's going to be quite important when I come to the last section, where I start talking about what we prioritise within the licensing team for the remainder of this year particularly. So vehicle checking is going to be one of our priorities because we have noticed a prevalence of poor condition vehicles we're having to take off the road. They're either dirty, scruffy, or there's lots of issues. But in this particular instance, there were loads with light bulbs not working, tyres in poor condition, damaged bodywork, and let's say 2 vehicles had to be taken off the road and have their licences suspended, so they couldn't work until they were fit to be used again. We're also getting a number of driver complaints with regards to drivers' attitude and standard of driving. Difficulty with a lot of the complaints we've had, and I've said this before, is it's always sometimes difficult to prove because you've got one person's word against the other. But we do investigate every single one, and we do deal with anything that we can robustly. We have had an issue with cross-border hiring. I'm on 5.2.4 now, and this is the first time this has been reported to any members, but we have had a threat of litigation by Bristol City Council with regards to the cross-border hiring issue, where our Hackney carriages that are licensed in Torvine are working in Bristol as private hire vehicles. We are looking at this, and we are using our intended use policy, which this committee approved back in July last year, and starting to take action against these drivers to remove licences where they cannot prove that they're predominantly working in Torvine. There is one word I would like changed in that paragraph, please, because on the bottom line of 5.2.4, it says another is pending refusal in May. I think when I wrote that, I was getting a bit too excited. It should be consideration in May. I can't say that it will be refused until we finish dealing with it. So that is with regards to that, and that side. Now, the next section in the taxi policy is on child sexual exploitation. Now, Deb Davis from Children's Services was due to join me at this point, or she was due to come down at 10:20 to join me for this particular part of the session. So if you don't mind, I'm going to skip over that, just in case she turns up late. Oh, yeah, would you mind? I thought she would come straight in.
Chairman, perhaps whilst we're waiting for that next person to come in, I must admit that with 5.2.4, I can see the point that is being raised here, but would we at any stage, surely we would not have badged up Torvine, Hackney carriages operating in another area. Surely that can't be allowed.
Legally, there is nothing legally that can stop a Hackney carriage plying for hire anywhere in the United Kingdom. Once it's licensed as a Hackney carriage, and with a licensed driver, it can ply for hire anywhere in the United Kingdom. That is the issue with the cross-border hiring. This is a national problem, not just a Torvine Bristol problem. It started off with case law. If you can remember back to when you approved the intended use policy back in July last year, it started off then with the case law that came from the Berwick-on-Tweed case of Newcastle upon Tyne, where Newcastle upon Tyne Council took Berwick-on-Tweed Council to court over exactly the same issue. And as a result of that, some recommendations came out of that, which is why we introduced the intended use policy, because we were starting to get a problem here with the Bristol drivers. We stemmed the flow quite quickly because back in January of 2014, we started doing knowledge tests. And that knocked it on the head anyway. The knowledge test stopped them actually coming in. So we haven't got as many as some. Blaenau Gwent have got a real problem up there. They've got hundreds up there which are licensed and not working in Blaenau Gwent. So there's no legal way of stopping them. The only way we can stop them is by looking at our intended use policy, because we've got no control over them if they're working in Bristol. Bristol got no control over them because they're not licensed by them, other than if they commit an offence over there that they can deal with. They've got no inspection powers over them. So it really is a problem, and it is a national problem, this. So with regards to this, we've brought in the intended use policy, already taken away 2 Hackney carriage providers' licences that were being used in Bristol. The third one, like I say, is due for consideration in May. So in the next couple of weeks, that licence expires. We've already been in communication with that particular licence holder, and we're looking for evidence that they're working in this area now. And if we can't find that evidence, then we will refuse to renew the licence. And then we have another 3 after that, and we're dealing with them as they come up for renewal. Bristol City Council, I have to say, they sort of went off without any pre-discussion or pre-communication. We just ended up with that letter on our laps. In fact, it went to Linda in Legal Services. It went from Chief Monitoring Officer to Chief Monitoring Officer, basically. Since then, there has been communication with Bristol, and we are working together now as best we can to try and solve this problem. But Torvine is not Bristol's biggest problem. They've got over 300 vehicles working in Bristol, which are not licensed by them. And you could imagine that's a real problem for them. And it's a problem that I fully understand. That the litigation letter came totally out of the blue, without any consultation, without any pre-discussion or anything, and it came as a little bit of a shock. So I won't say we've reacted to it by responding to it, but we haven't reacted to it any more than we were doing before, because we were already on track to deal with it. But it's going to take time. It's going to take time.
I have to say that I'm very worried and concerned about this. We have a situation here which has been reported to us where there are different councils in different parts of the country taking other councils to court. This is madness.
Yeah.
People are not paying their local taxes for one council to be prosecuting another council. Now, at the end of the day, I would rather look at this from a different point of view. I know it might be national, but when changes are made, they've got to be started somewhere. And it's as good a place as any to start them is from here. And I'd like to ask you to look into, not to comment upon now, as to whether we can control this much closer, in that when licences are offered here, they are offered for the specific use of this borough. Because just imagine now, had that Bristol issue, which seems to be sorting itself out, gone a bit further than that, the cost of officer time alone, sorting it all out, to do with something not even remotely to do with Torfaen County Borough Council. And I think that we need to take that on board and come up with some very positive, never mind what anybody else is doing, we'll turn around and come up with something and say this is what we are going to do, and then let them argue the toss about it and come up with something better. But to sit back and be aware of that and to allow it to happen, I don't think is appropriate.
Well, I mean, as soon as this started happening, we started putting procedures in place as soon as we could. Like I say, we were lucky. We stemmed the flow very early as soon as we realised we had a problem. Because until you find out, until it happens, it's always a knee-jerk reaction. But we were very proactive in Torfaen, much more proactive than some of our partner councils, and Caerphilly being one of them, Blaenau Gwent being another. They've got much bigger problems than we've got because they haven't dealt with this at an early stage. We stopped it, and they all went to the other councils. So we've protected ourselves in Torfaen, that's what I will say, by first of all introducing the knowledge test, which we commenced in January last year. Because what we're getting now, we're getting people ringing up, asking if there's a knowledge test. And once we say yes, they say, okay, thank you very much, and they put the phone down. Because they won't know our area, they won't be able to pass that knowledge test. Caerphilly have already, as you know, we started the knowledge test last year and we've been checking how it's going. Caerphilly are now using Torfaen training for their own knowledge tests. Blaenau Gwent have got an agreement now. They're about to go to licensing committee to get approval to start the same knowledge test with Torfaen training in Blaenau Gwent. So if you like, we're the pathfinders in Torfaen. Everyone else is following us. So that's a positive, I think you'll see. The fact that Bristol City Council just wrote to every single council who had any vehicles working in their area. We only had 6. Others have got hundreds. So we got in early and stopped it. It won't happen. We won't get that problem anymore. So we were already stopped it. We just got a few to sort out. That's the beauty of that for others.
Jake, and this is just for clarification, and so the knowledge test isn't a national requirement as such?
Everything we're doing through policy, which is why it's being approved by this licensing committee. This licensing committee has approved everything which we wanted to do to stop this happening. So it's all policy. There's no legislation to stop it.
Yeah, just to follow up, I'm reassured with the information given by the officer and that we are forward-thinking. We pride ourselves here at Torfaen in being forward-thinking, and it does prove that the collaboration between the training agency and other councils is working. But quite frankly, at the end of the day, perhaps we should be one of the leaders. This needs to be changed nationally, because quite frankly, there's going to be, I think we have to accept some reorganisation of authorities at some stage in the future. And if it is as big with neighbouring authorities, of which this authority and they may, who knows, be joining up together, the problem then becomes bigger for whomever it is. So if this can be nipped in the bud before all of that really takes off, that might be a good thing nationally, and perhaps something that we could lead on without putting the officers to, I know we've got a small team, so there's a limit as to what you can ask people to do, but nevertheless, well done for what they've done so far.
Thank you. What I will say is nationally, there's no appetite to change this. I went to a taxi conference in London recently, and they're looking at more deregulation, not more control. So I'm afraid that the Department for Transport do not share our views. I share your views. The Department of Transport doesn't. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next section now, and first I'll introduce Deborah Davis, who's the what's her actual title, Deb?
I'm the safeguarding manager now.
Safeguarding manager. They keep changing titles. She's coming in for this section because Deborah and I have met up with regards to this issue. I'll introduce it from the report to start with, and I'll ask Deborah to come in and just say what we've been discussing. I've just mentioned the taxi conference we went to in London recently. It was run by the Local Government Association, but it's off of the back of the Rotherham report, the Louise Casey report, into child sexual exploitation in that area, which I'm sure that most members are aware of because it's affecting all local authorities across the country as well as other agencies. And it's to do with the major section in that report particularly, and I've never seen such a high impact statement, was in relation to the licensing team in Rotherham and the criticisms that were made of the licensing regime and the approach in Rotherham. The main thrust is that the licensing team and the licensing committee, the members as well, were too much on the side of the drivers, the businesses, and not enough considering the victims. And that's where this thrust is now going. We're looking not so much at, obviously we want to make sure that the businesses out there, i.e. the taxi drivers, are able to carry out and conduct their trade without any interference if necessary. Unfortunately, we also have, well not unfortunately, but we have to consider public safety above that. And that's where perhaps the balance needs to be brought on this. So the whole conference was based around the fact of the Louise Casey report and the issues in Rotherham. However, we also had a talk from the Deputy Director of Children's Services in Oxford Council, who suffered similar issues to Rotherham with child sexual exploitation and linked in with the taxi trade. Now, what I will emphasise here is that it's not the taxi trade necessarily that are carrying out the child sexual exploitation. The issue here, and one of the major issues, is the fact that the taxi trade were actually moving vulnerable people around between the places where they were being either groomed or sexually exploited. So it's more to do with, although we have had taxi drivers here who we have taken licences away from because they've been involved in child porn, for instance. And they've gone to prison for what they've done, or they've assaulted females in taxis. So we are very robust on that, as you well know, when we do come to committee, that we take any form of sexual activity very, very seriously. But this was to heighten awareness for members and officers with regards to the powers we have and how we should be considering these things. Off the back of that, Deb and I met up and we had a chat about how this council could move forward. Perhaps if I hand over to you now, Deb, and perhaps you could sort of summarise what we discussed.
Well, that's water under the bridge since we discussed that. But,
Sorry.
Yeah. Basically, it's a good link up between Steve and I with the safeguarding unit. I think Steve's feedback from that conference was that there's a better arrangement here than in a lot of other places where they don't have the link up to the safeguarding unit. So traditionally, we have received licensing applications, as is right and proper, to check them to see if there are any known persons on there that are cause concern to us. Now, that's been happening for years and years. But with CSE as obviously causing major concern right across the country, but it is on a continuum of child protection issues. It's getting a lot of media attention at the minute, rightly so, but not just media. The whole world of safeguarding is looking at what we're doing in our areas and through organisations. And taxi licensing, etc., taxi companies, we've always known in safeguarding that area was a bit, they were all a bit vague about safeguarding, really weren't aware of, and safeguarding has morphed from adult protection, child protection into the bigger, the bigger picture, and everybody's starting to get the bigger picture now, and it is going in the right direction, I have to say. In Torfaen we're doing really, really well because of the regional developments that we merged regionally to a safeguarding board, children's board. That there is a lot of work being done through the subgroups of the board around CSE. There's a CSE Leads group, and it's through those groups that it's been picked up about training mainly for taxi companies and policy development and guidance around what they can do, what they should do, how do they respond. And there's a big black hole really, and we need to move towards plugging that gap in safeguarding knowledge, raising awareness and offering training, policies, etc. around safeguarding. So, and CSE is one of those factors. So, is that okay?
Absolutely one. Off the back of that, you'll see the next section when I go on to the Deregulation Act in a minute. We're going to have to change our taxi policy again in October. But off the back of that, I thought it was also an opportunity to have a look at this issue in the taxi policy. So I'll link in now. One of the handouts I've given you today is the consultation on the proposed amendments to the policy on the administration of. If you go to, well, the page with all the yellow bits on it, it's about the second piece of paper, about the fourth page. There's no page numbers on there, I'm afraid. But it's section 3 in particular. And this, I've written this as it's going out for consultation off the back of this as a new section to go in our policy. And I've widened it well beyond child sexual exploitation because, as members are aware, we have had issues with other things with regards to vulnerable adults, and I've made a point in this section that vulnerable adults include drunken females being brought back from the nightclub at night because they are vulnerable to attack, and we have had issues along those lines in past years. So the you've got the wrong one. Is that one? Yeah, that's right. I'm not going to read this out because obviously you've got it in front of you. But I'm looking to beef up our policy with regards to sexual exploitation and sexual inappropriateness. That's the title and the heading I've given it. I have referred to child sexual exploitation and why this has come to light. And the fact that we will be taking very robust action. So that's the bit we're going to be talking about as far as the policy consultation is in a minute. But linking into that, you'll see in sub-paragraph G, I've talked about a training package being produced that when is produced, that we will be expecting all drivers to actually attend that training. Now, based on what we've been told at the moment and the experiences of other councils who have introduced this type of training, and it's awareness training for drivers. We're not sort of beating them with a big stick. There are two aspects of this which have come up as being quite vital when we do this training. Number one is not to be done by licensing officers because they don't listen to us. It's got to be done by safeguarding and police or someone who works in child safeguarding. So it's got to be done by outside agencies. The second thing is if you try and do it voluntarily, they don't turn up. It's got to be mandatory. So what I've put in there, that once we have the training available, we will give a reasonable timescale for all drivers, including existing drivers, to actually attend this training. And the experiences of the councils across the UK that have done this and made it mandatory is not so much that the issues have gone down, but the intelligence coming into the safeguarding authority has gone up. Because suddenly the taxi drivers are aware. They're picking up this child, taking it from point A to point B, and suddenly thinking there's something funny about this. So the intelligence goes up. So it's not about beating the drivers with a big stick. I make that quite clear. Obviously, if a driver does act inappropriately, we will beat them with a big stick. But this is about making the majority of our taxi drivers who are honest, hard-working and compliant aware of this. It's all about awareness. It's also going to be quite relevant for members as well, because after the AGM, when we know who's going to be on the committee next year, it will be mandatory for members to do an hour's training with us on this issue with regards to how we approach it as far as the licensing committee and licensing hearings are concerned. And it will be that if that training is not done, because as you know we have had issues with attendance at training sessions, that member will not be able to sit on any panels or committees. It will have to be that firm. And that's what I've sort of put that in the report here, as you can see. On 527, I've made a particular point of that in that paragraph, because it is so important. We can't ignore it.
Can I come in there, Chair? In regarding 3G, if you like, personally I think when it says once commence a reasonable period of time will be given to licence holders to attend training, isn't that a bit wishy-washy, if you like, because how would you class a reasonable amount of time, if you like, and is that 1 year, 2 years, 3 years?
I think the answer to that is, at the moment, until we've got the training and we know what our resources are, we don't know how quickly we can do it. As soon as we know what our resources are and how we can do the training, we might say that we'll be putting on, to start off with, we may say we'll run it for about 3 months and expect everyone to have attended, existing licence holders, in 3 months. But then when we get new licence holders come along, we're going to have to put it on again after that at some point so that they have that training. We may even become a requirement. There's a lot of maybes in what I'm saying now, because until we've worked out who is going to do this training, we don't know what our resources are going to be. We've got over 300 drivers out there that are going to need this training. Now, we could probably do them in sessions of maybe 40 or 50, and we could get them all done in a week. But it might take a couple of months because of the availability of the training sessions and having to do them at different times and periods in order to fit in with the drivers' commitments themselves.
Because the chances are that this is going to be amended again, though, isn't it?
Yes. This is not.
With that in mind, wouldn't it be better to put some form of timescales in, which again, knowing that it's going to be amended, it can be changed accordingly, but at least there's some form of time frame in position for everyone to undertake the training.
Yeah, the way I've worded this is that as soon as we know what our commitments are, we will publish timescales and expect them to be done within those timescales. So if this is approved as a generalisation at the moment, but yes, I agree with you, we will have very robust timescales for this as soon as we know how and when we can do it. Because we don't even know when we can start it yet, because we've got to get together, we've got to set up the training, we've got to get the trainers, we've got to work out how we're going to do it, where we're going to do it. Like I say, we're only talking about maybe a 1 hour session. We're not talking about it being a whole morning, so we're asking drivers to come give up a couple of hours of their time to attend, sit through an hour session and go again. We take it any longer than that and they'll lose interest. But if we can do that, and we might even be able to do it all in one day by doing 1 hour sessions all the way through the day and into the early evening, because that's what we need to do. But you're going to always miss some. You're always going to miss some, whatever date you set it on. So you may have to do it over a couple of weeks or 2 or 3 weeks or something like that. My hope is that we can do it fairly swiftly within a month or two. And that's what I would hope to do. But obviously there's always going to be stragglers. And we will have to put a cut-off date in, and I've said it in here, that once that cut-off date has been published, if they haven't done the training by that cut-off date, their licence is suspended until they've done it. That will make them do it. Do you see what I mean? It will be robust. It will be.
I agree with what you've just said, quite frankly, that if they don't carry out this training, if it's brought in, then they don't do the job. It's as simple as that. But there was a mention there of training for members of this committee. And it seems to be a trait of things today. I spent an entire lifetime, 51 years I worked for, and I received more training as an elected member than I ever did in any time of my working career. and it seems that councillors are expected to know everything about just about everything that goes on in the world, never mind in their local community. So there are needs for people to be trained, but again, I make the point, you can't be everywhere all of the time. Today, as we sit here, I should be in a school on the other side of the road. I had made a choice. I'm here. And I think that's what it's all about. It's about the commitment that is put in. With regard to, we're having the training, I understand it's set up, isn't it, for after the council AGM. And before we train anybody, the members of the panel have got to have the training first. Because if they aren't given the training, of course, there's no panel.
This is exactly what that. It's only a 1 hour training session I've put down for members. I can't remember the date now. It's all been booked by Jackie. So it's just 1 hour, just in order to go through this. All right. It is purely just to go through this and highlight the importance of consideration of these issues in light of the Louise Casey report. So once you've got your awareness of it, and it is just an awareness to make everyone aware, then of course the chances are, or there's always a possibility, that you're going to be sat on a panel within a month with a similar sort of issue that you're going to have to consider. So we want to start thinking about this now at an early stage, even before the policy comes in, that you're looking at these in a robust way. And that's really, it's to do with the recommendations of the Louise Casey report, just to make sure, particularly licensing committee members, are aware of those recommendations.
Could I come in on what Debbie said in regarding the links with the licensing team? And I think that's great, but it was emphasised to see if there was any issues or concerns. Now, surely, if there was any issues or concerns, especially when it comes to the policing as well, if there aren't any issues or concerns, wouldn't they be highlighted in the CRBs or the disclosure and barring forms? Or?
Not always. It depends. One of the issues we have at the moment is that taxi drivers in particular were called a notifiable occupation under a Home Office guidance. Which meant that whenever anything happened with that individual, because the taxi driver is a notifiable occupation, the police disclosed information to us. The Home Office withdrew that notifiable occupation scheme in March, and it no longer exists. So the police are not under an obligation to release stuff to us. As far as CRBs are concerned, we do a DBS check once every 3 years. Lots of things happen within that 3 years, which we don't find out about. Taxi drivers are under a condition to tell us about any convictions they get within the period of their licence, but they don't. It's a fact of life, they just don't. Some, when they get arrested, don't even tell the police that they're taxi drivers because they may have 2 jobs. There's a lot of people out there that do taxi driving just on a Friday and Saturday night when they're as a bit of a sideline, a bit of pocket money. So they tell them about their main job, but maybe not about the fact that they're a taxi driver on a Friday and Saturday night. To be fair, when we do the training, I've actually got a copy of a booklet for each committee member, which will be on the committee after the AGM, which was produced by local government in London, and it was based around this conference, which I will be handing out at that conference. And I've had an input into that book because I actually work on the local government forum up in London on licensing. And I had an input into that book. And fortunately, I was able to give good practice from Torvine, which has been published in that book, and that's gone national. So, again, I'm saying that we have a very good working relationship. We've been called to, I can't remember how many PSGs, professional strategy meetings, where the social services ring us and say, we've got this professional strategy meeting, can you come along? It's to do with taxi licensing issues. Give us a name, we look at the driver, and we then come up with information. As a result of that, we take actions which are decided at those professional strategy meetings, and those are the things that I've emphasised in the book. I think I've already circulated the book to everybody by email as electronic copy, but I actually have got the hard copies, which will be dished out to the members on the training after the committee. But it is, I mean, not blowing our own trumpet, but Torfaen do tend to lead the way a bit. For a little council in the South Wales Valleys, we do actually do quite well on some of these issues, and we are very good at it. We haven't got major issues. I'm not saying we haven't got any issues. We haven't got major issues with liaison and communication, not like has been identified in the Rotherham report. So when I read the Rotherham report, I thought, what, they did that? What, they did that? You know, because it's alien to me. You know, and that was the reaction I had. So you can be satisfied, I think, that the Deb and whoever sat in her chair, because it was Bernadette before you, and so it's not just we've always had a good working relationship, and we do work well together.
Could I just thank you, Deb, for coming along and giving us that time up? Thank you, Deb. Right.
Okay, it's me again. Going on to the next section in the policy, which is the Deregulation Act of 2015. Now, I've already sent round that there was the Deregulation Act changes the legislation in the change the legislation document, which I said with regard to the Licensing Act. But it didn't only affect the Licensing Act; it's also affected the taxi and private hire legislation. And there are various things which are going to be amended as from the 1st of October. Number one, the duration of licences. Driving licences will have to be valid for 3 years. At the moment, we issue one-year licences. Operators' licences will have to be valid for 5 years. At the moment, we issue one-year licences. It means a change in policy and procedure with regards to our application process, and it's going to affect the way in which we do DBS checks in line with the applications and everything. So what we've had to do is have a look at the policy, and because on our procedures, which is in the policy, and change the procedures in the policy and have a look at it to come into effect on the 1st of October. And that is what this is what this particular section is all about. There's also a change in there. Now, this is going to fly in the face of what we've already discussed about cross-border hiring with the Hackney carriages, which is going to allow private hire operators to subcontract their bookings. That one we fought tooth and nail against. The Local Government Association and all other organisations like the Institute of Licensing, who represent licensing enforcement or licensing regulators, have fought tooth and nail against that one because it's opening up a whole can of worms. The government were determined to put as much deregulation in before they closed down as they possibly could. So this went through and it was passed. There were a couple of things we did manage to get out, but it was a real fight, tooth and nail, to get them out, about allowing people who have not got a driving licence, a Hackney carriage or private hire driving licence, to drive a licensed vehicle. They wanted to put that in as well. They didn't need to have a driving licence if they weren't using it for hire. Well, that would just open up a whole can of enforcement worms. We managed to get that one out. But these are in. As far as the licence change is concerned, it's not a big issue as far as enforcement is concerned, but it is an administrative issue. So we're having to change the policy on the administrative issues. As far as the bookings are concerned, I've boosted up the section on records that operators must keep if they do a cross-border hiring, because it's not in there at the moment. We need to be able to trace where, if someone's run a taxi company A and they expect a taxi company A to turn up, and taxi company B turns up and picks them up and takes a journey, and they make a complaint about the taxi driver and taxi company B, we need to have they're only going to remember that they ran taxi company A. So we need to have an audit trail of where they go. So you'll see that in the policy, and I'll go to the policy in a minute, I've had a look at changing that side of things. So I've already mentioned the first section, which is the bit about child sexual exploitation. There's a lot of changes on the applications to renew driving licences. These are only extracts from our policy, the extracts which are being changed. This isn't the whole policy. This is the consultation document I'm sending out. And as you can see, these are all the changes I've made with regard to driving licences, the way in which we're going to deal with DBS checks in future, the conditions of licence. So you notice I've actually beefed up the conditions of licence in there as well on the drivers. And I've added a little thing, shall comply with any conditions or requirement which are approved by the council, because that's something at the moment which is, we approve things, but we've got to make sure that they comply with them. And also, I've boosted up a little bit on sections 8 and 9 to fall in line with the looking after their passenger, the duty of care they must have for their passengers. This links in with the sexual inappropriateness, etc. So it's just boosting those paragraphs up a little bit to give it a bit more meat, a bit more teeth, which will assist you as members when you're making decisions. Well, on the panels, when you've got someone before you, you've got something there that you can follow and say, yes, you fit into that category, give me a good reason why I should depart from it, because that's what the decision you'll be making on the day. Section 3, private hire operators. As you can see, I've changed, that's changed because of the change in the length of the licence. In the first part, so the application section has changed, and then you'll see that under licence conditions, you'll see that I've added the section 7, which is the subcontracting of private hire bookings. Now, I need to have this policy in place on the 1st of October when this legislation comes in. So my intention is, as you can see by the letter on the front, is to go out for consultation now. I'm ready to go, as long as you approve it, and to have 2 months consultation to the end of June, and bring it back before licensing committee in July for approval. That's my timescale. And all I'm asking the committee to do today is to approve the consultation of the policy document.
Right, we'll move that we do it. Get on with it as quick as possible.
And I second that, no problem.
Thank you. So that's been approved, Steve. Thanks.
Right, thank you, Chair. I now move on to the Gambling Act. The Gambling Act doesn't cause us a great deal of problems. When it does, it gets complex. So the fact that we've got no issues or complaints in this period is not unusual. However, we're on one of the treadmill timescales again with regards to the licensing policy. The Act requires us to review the policy once every 3 years. It has to be approved by full council and then advertised for 1 month before it comes into force, and it has to come into force on the 31st of January 2016. I don't know where 2013 came from. Oh, no, sorry, that was when it was commenced last time, sorry. So it has to come into force on the 31st of January. Because it's council, I've spoken to Richard Grinnell with regards to council availabilities, and he has said to me, I'm not going to get November or December, I'm going to have to get it into council in October, which is earlier than I would have liked. So therefore, I'm on a tight timescale to get this one out for consultation as well. So this one has been... with this one again, like I did with the Licensing Act 2003 policy, this is a collaboration between all 5 Gwent councils as a collaboration agreement. We've taken the templates of all of the councils that we have. We've looked at everybody's policy, we've put them together, and then added all the new stuff, because there is a load of new stuff that is coming in the new guidance to local authorities and the LCCP codes of practice and conditions that are going to be attached to all gambling premises licences, and we've had to take account of that. Now, I'm not going to go through this policy in depth, but to help the members, all the new bits are highlighted. So it's easy for you to see what's new in the policy. There are other little changes where I've changed dates and that. I haven't highlighted every single thing that's been changed. I've just highlighted what is going to be new, different to our existing policy, other than dates, if you see what I mean. So, again, because we're on a tight timescale, I'm looking at a 2-month consultation between the 1st of May and the 30th of June. For the consultation period, and again to come back before licensing committee for them to say yes, it's okay to go to full council, and then it will go to full council in October. for approval. Then I'll have to get the advert done and it will be ready for implementation in January. So all I'm asking the committee to do today, please, is to approve the start of consultation for the Gambling Act policy.
I move that, Chair, that we should get on with that as soon as possible.
And seconded.
Thank you. That's unanimous.
Thank you, Chair. Right, the rest of the report is back to the normal update on what we've done, what we've been doing. As you can see, there's very little on the Health Act street trading and charity collections in that period. A lot of it's down to where we've been putting our priorities, to be honest with you. And I have to say that our priorities have been with the things that have caused us the most problems and what's giving me the legal headaches, which are all the policies and procedures that I'm having to put through. The scrap metal and the taxi licensing has been by far our priorities at the moment. Scrap metal is a headache for us because of trying to get people to produce records, etc. We have got a prosecution pending in scrap metal now, which is reported down in 5.8 somewhere. I'll see it. Oh, the 5.8.2. And we're looking as far as we can. We got a couple of objections from the police one to an application and one to an existing licence holder as well. I appreciate this doesn't come through licensing committee because it's not a function of licensing committee, it's an executive function, but I still report it to you to show you what we are doing in those respects. So that's for you to note. Under prosecutions and appeals, Mr. Brian Stubbs, we had the High Court case which upheld our appeal or our case stated against the magistrates, Newport Magistrates Court, against their decision. So the High Court found for the council and reversed the magistrate's decision, said he was guilty of the offence and referred him back to the Magistrates Court for sentence. That was heard at Caerphilly Magistrates Court by a district judge, and he was sentenced and fined. Only a very minor fine, and we recovered some costs, but very little. The main thing with this is that we actually got the decision we wanted. We had the decision which was necessary in order to protect other street traders. Obviously, the costs involved in that were quite high, but that's something we had to bear.
Why didn't we, or why weren't we able to recoup all our costs?
It's down to the person, the court. The High Court, we applied for something in the region of £2,500 costs when we went to the High Court. The High Court decided that he would only pay £500 as a contribution towards those costs. So that was his lordship made that decision at the time. It went back to the Magistrates Court, who then had to implement the decision of the High Court. The High Court decided to only award the £500 that we applied, that was granted by the High Court, and not to grant any further costs for the magistrates' hearings, for all the not guilty pleas, etc. Because we'd obviously gone through quite a big process before we even went to the High Court. We had two separate cost issues. As I said, the district judge, without being critical of it, I felt had a little sympathy for the defendant in his circumstances, and didn't really support the council's view on the cost issue. But he fined him, but only a minor amount. It was a very small fine, to be fair, compared to what he could have been. Bear in mind, there were 3 different charges brought before him of unlawful street trading. That he felt it wasn't important, or it didn't warrant a heavy fine or imposition of costs. He had to follow the High Court cost, but nothing else. So that happens, I'm afraid. We spend a lot of money on these things, and the courts don't always support us with the cost issues. I know you'll have to be quiet on this one.
All I would say, Chair, is that costs to the courts and everything have just changed. And that might not happen again.
Okay. Right, the driver, we've got one more prosecution pending at the moment, which is the driver, which was the Bristol Hackney driver who refused to take a fare. He's being prosecuted, and he's got his first hearing on the 22nd of June at Cwmbran Magistrates Court. And the suspension of the driver, which we've mentioned before, has gone through quite a lengthy process. And we're back in court with that one on the 18th of May. We have now employed a barrister on that one to actually take the case for us. It has become very complex and very confrontational, I should say, between the defendant solicitor and our legal team, and in discussion with Justine, who was taking the appeal through the court, we're going to instruct the barrister. A barrister reviews before on some cases which are is set for a whole day trial. So we will see what turns out from that. I can't go into any further detail on this because it's obviously sub judice at the moment. As soon as we've finished with the trial and we have a decision, I will then report the whole circumstances of why we had to employ a barrister to the licensing committee at that meeting. And that's everything on prosecutions and appeals. Take a deep breath, and I think we're on to the more or less the last section here, licensing team performance. I'm not going to go over the reasons why, etc. The performance table is on the back. You can see the targets that we have achieved, and particularly in the service improvement plan. Unfortunately, these were red, yellows, and greens on Appendix A on page 31, we've sort of hit some of our targets. A lot of them we've missed, but they are on the prioritisation side, and this is what I'm going to be looking at now. I've gone into this. We were ready for this. I hope we've done better than I thought we would do, to be honest with you, thanks to the diligence of licensing officers like Simone, who've gone out there and really worked hard to try and get particularly our high-risk things done with the vehicle inspections, etc. That's made a big difference. But with Licensing Act, because most of what was doing under the Licensing Act with pubs, etc., was quite low risk for us, anything that needed doing we did, but it was done on a risk basis. And if I go on to the risk thing, the targets that were set in 2014-15 have been carried forward into the 2016. This is paragraph 6.4 of the report, Chair. But, however, we're keeping the same targets because at the moment, as you're aware, we're temporarily one member of staff down through maternity leave. That will be redressed in November. I don't expect us to be able to hit our targets this year with that one member of staff down. However, I don't want to reduce the targets because it shows what we are able to do against set targets. Once Claire returns from maternity leave, you may well find we will creep back up to our target again. But we have to accept that whilst we're a member of staff down, that we cannot do everything. And as you can see by everything else in this report, we are quite busy in a lot of other areas. So I've kept them the same, with not an expectation that we won't achieve every target, but we will do the high-risk stuff. And the high-risk stuff which I've brought up in this report is the vehicle inspections and scrap metal dealers. Those are our high-risk groups.
Could a temporary member of staff be brought in to cover the maternity leave?
In past years, that has happened. However, under the current financial constraints, it was decided that was not going to happen in this circumstances. That was a management decision above my level. All I can say is no.
Could I just say, Steve, probably on behalf of all the members of the licensing committee, I think the licensing team have done a magnificent job this year. I know they've been understaffed, but I still think you've done a magnificent job, and I think Torvine should be proud to have such an active team. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Chair.